He always thought of me as someone who was the symbol of violence. Of course, I never knew this when I worked with him, because we never had words, we never had anything of that kind of nonsense. Nor did Sandy have with anybody else. He was a perfect gentleman.
Well, only film buffs really know him. He's really almost unknown as far as mainstream directors. Directors of his time are being forgotten anyway. I mean, kids today don't even know who John Ford was.
Terribly Scottish, stubbornly Scottish. That's what I think is so sad. He's a very honest, direct man, which I like to imagine most Scotsmen are. And you can't be too honest and too direct in the film industry.
I think he taught me the value of film, of the honor of making film, of dealing with that magical instrument and the realization of certain visions, the solidifying of dreams, that responsibility. I don't think there's anything that anybody can do that's more important than make films.
What happened was he came here, and by the sort of macho herd in Hollywood was really run over. They really trod on him, I think. And I don't think his sensitivity and the delicateness of what he can do was respected.
Danny Kaye is making a comeback, and Anne Margaret is looking for...
Nationality is a very confusing thing. I was born in America. Indeed, I was conceived in Hollywood, downtown. But my parents were Scots. My father, followed by his girlfriend, had both run away from my grandparents in Glasgow and came here, and they were married here, and I was conceived here, but my mother hated Los Angeles. I've always thought that perhaps my reactions to Hollywood are partly prenatal. So she went back to Boston. I was born there, and then my father died in Philadelphia in the great flu epidemic, and I was carted back to Scotland at the age of about 6. But the blood is Scots, and the temperament is Scots, and I feel Scots, although I am indeed 100% American. I was interested in theatre design and was a walk-on player at the Scottish National Players for a short while, in which I had made a huge and terribly important discovery, which is I have no talent at all as an actor.
Mackendrick's family had hoped that he'd be a portrait painter, maybe even a great portrait painter. But during the Depression years, he quit Glasgow Art School, and he went into advertising.
I used my skill as an illustrator in doing sit-up sketches to parlay myself into the director's chair, really. And I've always done drawing, which is my equivalent of writing, really, because I think in terms of images. But once I've done the drawings, I hardly ever keep to them, because I regard them really as my rehearsals. And the great sort of fallacy is the idea that careful pre-planning like that in some way ties you down. It doesn't, it frees you. The reason why they took me on was that they felt, I think probably correctly, that words were not my strong point, certainly not dialogue. And so I had developed a certain knack for thinking in terms of visual action, and they thought I could bring to this sort of lavish thing a certain sort of pictorial abilities. At Ealing, I really felt I was I discovered later that I had been enormously spoiled, because I'm not really awfully interested in the deal-making and the financial aspects of setting up movies. I'm not interested in it because I'm not very good at it. I know it sounds sympathetic to say that you're not really interested in the money-making, but that really is a self-indulgence, because you have to remember that the money-making is what the business is about. The deal is the real product, and the movie is a sort of incidental byproduct of the deal.
3/4 way through, he suddenly sat in Castleby, I remember, in Barra, and said, "I've decided I'm not making a comedy, I'm making a documentary of island life," which is typically Sandy.
They got in a slight mess in the cutting room, and I came into the studio one day and found that they thought of turning it into a sort of second feature, and because I loved the subject, I got sort of het up about it. So Mickey Bolton said, "All right, go into the cutting room and see what you can do with it." So I did that. And every time I said to Sandy, "Well, I think this sequence should go like this, A, B, C, D," he said, "Of course, I mean, that's the way I intended it."
It was absolutely terrifying. For me, it took the form of getting very bad asthma. It was a rather hot summer, and I couldn't sleep. And one of the reasons that I married my present wife is that I remember getting up in the middle of the night and crawling on hands and knees to the only telephone booth on the island to phone up my girlfriend, as she was then, and complain that I was thinking of committing suicide. And instead of getting any sympathy, I got a terrible bawling out, and she said, "It's only a film." And I hung up and walked back and went fast asleep, because I thought an ideal wife for a movie director. Alec's first suggestion for it was that he should play as a spastic. And in my office, he gave an imitation of a cripple here, which was really gruesome, horrendously funny, but stomach-turning in its effect. So we had to say, no, I'm sorry, Sir Michael Balcom will never stand for that. So Alec got rather annoyed and sulked for a little bit and went away and looked out of the window. And when I went on talking about the script, he was snipping away with a pair of scissors, and he made some paper teeth which he stuck in, and turned round and grinned at me. The period during which you watch Alec develop those mannerisms of behavior is an exhilarating period for the director. And it's one in which I think you learn as a director to know your role as somebody who just sits back and watches and provides the space in which the actor can do his own work.
I don't recall him saying very much to me as an actor. I guess it's because he felt I was the epitome of evil. As far as he was concerned, no matter what you did, no matter how good it really was, it wasn't good enough. He was always reaching for that extra dimension that was beyond anyone's grasp, but that's the way he got good things, of course. But he worked in a kind of a world of his own. He really was the sort of mad professor, but very brilliant.
The weird thing about Burt is that when he comes into a room, I bet you can measure the temperament, and everybody's, the pulse beat of everybody in the room goes up, because you have a sense that you're in a room with something wild. He is, in genuine sense, that monstre sacré, sacred monster that has to be the quality of the major star.
Ealing Studios had simply faded away, and Sandy Mackendrick had to come, reluctantly, to Hollywood. The idea was that he should film George Bernard Shaw's play, The Devil's Disciple, which was something witty and dry and British, and just like Ealing. But it didn't work out that way. It was the late 1950s when the old studio system was losing money hand over fist, and the only sure thing they had left in Hollywood was a star. So the stars were taking power, and the first of them was Burt Lancaster. He had his own independent production company, Hecht Hill Lancaster. And while Mackendrick waited for his 3 new bosses to get the Shaw play in front of the cameras, he was assigned to another property they happened to have on hand, the very American, very New York, Sweet Smell of Success.
We started shooting in the most terrifying circumstances you could have wished, which was shooting in Times Square at rush hour with a camera crane at twilight for that magic hour shot here, and 3 pages of script. And I was so scared out of my wits, in fact, that I had no time to be worried about anything except just getting it done.
The greatest tribute I can play to Mackendrick about Sweet Smell is the camera work that he did himself. I'll never forget saying to Sir Carol Reed, who I'd done one picture with, and we're going to do another, and it had to do with New York, and we were all set. Until Carol Reed saw Sandy Mackendrick's Sweet Smell. And he said, "Hill, we're wasting our time. There's nobody is going to film New York like Sandy Mackendrick."
I should say that the only reason why I would accept the compliment is that at the time, I think very few people had shot on the streets of New York. Now, it's much easier with the lightweight equipment that you've got, and faster film stock and so on. It's very much easier, and great films have been done in New York since then. But it was indeed one of the first attempts to shoot in the streets of New York, for real, as it were. Hollywood was getting very ingrown, and the people always wanted to build everything on the back lot. I think Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt was one of the few films that he managed to persuade them to get out and shoot on location. But in the case of this shooting in New York, Hecht Lancaster were innovators in this respect too, in that they allowed me to go and learn about New York. And I was allowed to go out there with a cameraman and photograph the city, photograph the town, spending a good deal of money and an enormous number of photographs, and having a system for doing it. You stand in a certain place and you go click, click, click all the way around. And then you yourself, you don't allow anybody else to do it, stick them all up with Scotch tape. And you take these hundreds, thousands of photographs and take them back to your office and stick them on the wall. And you discover, looking at the photographs, something that is different from the experience of living there, because you always thought, you know, it's great, we got the tower and this doorway, and then you realize you can't get them in the same frame. But the pictures tell you that. So gradually you begin to take down off the wall the pictures that aren't working and leaving the ones that are. And we did that while Clifford was busy rewriting the script. And I learned the image of New York and what worked. It's a simple technical problem. The impression of New York, if you've been there, is this extraordinary claustrophobic feeling that gets from the fact that there are skyscrapers right down there on top of you. But you can't show that. How do you show it? The only way to show it is by using a moving camera and getting it low so somebody walks up into camera and you see the buildings above you.
He was really brilliant, in our opinion, with the camera, the way he used it. Quite extraordinary. And one day he set up a movement. I say 42 moves, I might be exaggerating, but it was quite a lot. It certainly was 25 or 30 moves on a dolly, in which you moved into a close shot and you moved into side shots and you panned with different characters and all. For a scene that ran about 3.5 to 4 minutes on film, maybe 5, a fairly long scene, all in one shot, covering everybody. Well, of course, the crew went crazy and they worked for about, I don't know, it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon before we started to shoot. We had rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. The floor was a mass of tape marks where they had to stop, turn, go this way, move forward, move back, blah, blah, blah. And the scene involved the girl, Susan Harrison, Tony, and myself in Hunsaker, the character Hunsaker's apartment. And we did the scene. Sandy said, fine, do one more. Did it again, fine. Did one more. And he finished that one. He said, all right, print that. He said, I really don't like it. I really don't like it. He said, let's take up all the marks. Let's start all over again. Well, in addition to playing the lead in the picture, I was also nominally, not nominally, but in a manner of speaking, the producer, because it was my company doing it. And I said, Sandy, I'm sorry, you can't do that. I said, we lost a day's work. I said, if you want to take the tapes up, you better take them up at 11 o'clock in the morning.
The whole business of making movies in Hollywood turned out to be so radically different from making films, certainly in the Ealing days and that kind of wonderful, who needs a theater, we can do it right here in the barn kind of attitude. I mean, here it was, even doing independent production, it was big and it was corporate and rule of committee and so on and so forth.
When Sweet Smell of Success was finished, and only then, Mackendrick could fly back to London to film his beloved Shaw. But what seemed like an ideal project turned into a disaster.
Sandy may disagree with me, but I have to tell you my version of it. In the hotel in London, as a matter of fact, Harold Heck said, Sandy, we have $1.5 million to do this picture. Can you bring it in 49 days? That was the schedule. He said, because if we can't do it, he says, the money has to come out of our pockets. There's no contingencies or anything of that kind. And we simply don't want to do that. He said, yes, don't worry, I can do it, and so forth.
Sandy got over to shoot the picture with the cast, and as I understand it, he was accused of being much too slow. He wasn't getting nearly enough up on the screen. And so it had to be Burt's decision, along with Harold, that they'd better remove Mackendrick as director of the picture.
When people want to unload a director, the easy way is to claim, that he doesn't know what he's doing. What often they really mean is that he's trying to do something that you don't want him to do.
But in any way, the real story is that we fired Sandy, and we fired him very reluctantly, because we were afraid he couldn't finish the picture in time.
In going back on these things that went wrong, there's something I'd like to say, in which maybe account for my certain reluctance in it. One of the things that I think is good about Hollywood is that nobody ever goes back and explains what went wrong. Because most of us in the movie business, I mean, half of our work goes wrong, or things that aren't made and don't get off the ground. But the tradition in the West Coast and in America in general is don't talk about the things that are wrong, get on with what's right. So in a weird way, Hollywood never fails because failures are simply put out of mind. They didn't happen.
It's one of those films that, gets to you. It got to me, I can live in that film,
In effect, when it finally came out, Hughes liked the film, and I think it was a commercial failure, and I think the end of my association with Fox was based on some problems of a review in Time magazine again. I thought it was a good review, but it started off saying Mackendrick has been very successful in directing little English films. Now, little must have made Zanuck's hair stand on end because it had been very expensive because of the production problems. But the review ended by saying it has a curious aftertaste. It's a bit like listening to Shirley Temple sing The Good Ship Lollipop while dismembering a puppy.
But even the greatest of movie makers still needs to eat, and so Mackendrick took on one last Hollywood assignment: Don't Make Waves.
I can remember a picture that he made with Martin Ransohoff. I don't know why he took on the picture to begin with, but I always remember Sandy being on the set this day and saying to Sandy, "How's it going?" Sandy put out his tongue and went, "Ah." In other words, he was sort of throwing up. I said, "You get along all right with the producer?" Put a finger to his head as though he was going to shoot himself.
I think he must have had what is indelicately known in the burlesque trade as the flop sweats. We all had it to some degree. And that's because Don't Make Waves was unfortunately about an essentially unlikable bunch of people. They were narcissists, they were backstabbing people, they were very superficial, greedy. There wasn't a redeeming one of them, but we were all doing our best. When you're on a sinking ship, you bail like crazy.
As a friend of mine once said, that if you have one non-success in town, it is like being a leper. You go around with a bell around your neck and someone preceding you saying, "Unclean, unclean," And I'm not saying that that's exactly what happened to Sandy, because I think it was probably mutual. If I were Sandy, I'm not sure that I would have wanted to go on, given the legacy of Don't Make Waves.
Now, when a director's career just ends in Hollywood, you won't find anybody in mourning. The director retreats to a smaller house. He scrabbles to sell ideas. He's lucky if people even return his calls. But Mackendrick's time in the wilderness did not last long, because Sandy Mackendrick simply remade his life. Unlikely as it sounds, Walt Disney had put up the money for a Californian art school, somewhere a new generation of animators could get culture. And Cal Arts had a film school, and that film school needed a dean.
And it was very free-form at the beginning, very undisciplined, and I think that the Disney people, the trustees, got very upset, never more so than at a meeting where I think some of the faculty stripped entirely nude to make a point about something or other, full disclosure possibly, I'm just not sure what. But it was and it continues to be, they've now regularized it some, but it is still probably the most interesting, open-minded, avant-garde school of higher education, certainly in the West and almost any place in the country.
My wife phoned up from London and said, "This man has come all the way from California over to London to meet you," and there you are in California. And I thought at the moment maybe he was somebody who was interested in backing many of these films that never got made. So I went downtown to see him, and we found out that we had various friends in common, and we spent most of the time talking about that. He was just trying to get me to talk. Towards the end of the lunch, he said, "No, I think you've got it wrong. I don't want to get into the movie business. I just thought if you would like to get out of it. Everybody really wants to make a movie. It's, you don't exist unless you've made a movie." There's that story of somebody over UCLA who walked around Westwood, where UCLA is, and asked every person that he met, "How's your screenplay going?" and was up to about 12 before he met somebody who said, "I'm actually not working on a screenplay." Because every student who comes here seems to have this dream to create an imaginary world, and thinks of that as being not simply a movie director, but being an author, producer, screenwriter, and director, and editor. And that, I'm afraid, is what kids straight out of high school come here to do. And of course, it's a fantasy. It betrays an arrogance, which is a necessary arrogance, because your energy in this world, I understand it because I was exactly like that at that age myself.
It may be a very American trait that you believe that you should be able to do everything yourself. It's the kind of thing that Orson Welles' model certainly inflicts on 18-year-old students, to believe that the director as God. Sandy would challenge that over and over again by simply plunking us down with all the other gods and forcing us to really defend our pieces, our ideas.
Sandy had a wry attitude about Hollywood. I think he had a very rough time here creatively, and I think there's no doubt that he was somewhat bitter about the treatment the Hollywood system affords skilled directors.
I think it's a challenge for the student, which Sandy thinks is absolutely important that it be met, that he deny you access to things, that he tell you that no, you probably can't write, and no, you can't direct, because he knows if you're really going to write and you're really going to direct, you're going to do it anyway.
It took him a while to learn how to teach. He was a bit of a bully the first couple of years, but as he grew to have more finesse, the things he passed on are going to have such extraordinary influence over the Hollywood of the next 20 years, I feel.
I wake up every morning in a way that I never did in the old days in the movie business. Wake up with a sort of eager mixture, on the one hand, of exasperation and curiosity. It is quite true that the walls of my office are covered with drawings of films that I never made, never got to make. I don't feel tremendous regret about that here. They were things that I went back to work on while waiting for something else to happen. It's been suggested on occasion that things like Mary Queen of Scots, which I worked on for about 20 years or something like that here. It's probably a good thing that it never was made, because one can always go back to it and dream about it.